Hey, Lord of the Rings fans, it's your boy KnewBettaDoBetta here once again. Very excited for this episode. Voices of Arda. You know what time it is. You know the vibes. Got my homegirl, KaliCosplay, co-host, the best, the dopest. Kali, introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, KaliCosplay here for another. This is going to be a very interesting episode of Voices of
It's going to be
Arda.
deep. Got my
We
serious face on.
Here, get serious. We got your academic faces on now. We have with us a very special guest, good friend of ours, Amber, who is also known on social media as CritiqueGeek. So
Hello.
if you ever hear us refer to her as geek, we're not being mean or anything. That's how we refer to each other on the socials.
It's my nickname. It's fine.
But we'll call you Amber here today.
Yep, sounds good.
All right. Amber, would you like to introduce yourself? Let us know where you are in social media, what social medias you're on, projects you're working on, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Amber. As Kelly said, I'm CritiqueGeek on Instagram and TikTok. I'm on a few other places, but really Instagram, TikTok. You can also find my secret Tumblr if you dare.
Ooh.
Tumblr.
Yeah. I consider myself like an all fandom content creator. I do not control the hyperfixation. The hyperfixations control me. So I'm not a Tolkien only creator. I'm a little all over the place. All media, all things nerdy. You never know.
That is awesome.
That is awesome. I call that well-rounded. And
thank you.
That is great.
You are also someone who is very well learned. So tell us about your credentials. Let us know your credentials.
Okay. So because we're getting a little academic today, I do want to preface by saying I have a bachelor's degree in English. I have a master's degree in film. So I kind of come at things from that framework when I'm talking about it. Just a lot of literary theory and film theory, because why not?
Yeah, so that's what's up. That's what's up. I also want to just dump this in there because I always love talking about this because whether she knows it or not, Geek is somebody I highly respect because she does not take no shit. And people from New York respect that so much. Geek, I really respect the way you hold your boundaries with you don't take no shit from nobody, and you just are who you are. I love that about you. We argue quite a bit, but it's awesome.
We do, but it's all
good
love.
Arguments.
You know?
It's all love. We respect each other and we respect each other's boundaries. So I absolutely adore Geek. I think she's awesome. So I'm excited to get into these conversations about what are we talking about, Kali?
We are talking today about allegory and subcreation in Tolkien's works. First, though, I have a question for you. What do you call an academic paper written by pudding?
Written by pudding?
You would call it a dissertation.
A dissertation. Yeah, a dissertation.
Oh wow, that's you. First of all, the fact that you was about to get that joke, that half of that respect that I was just going on about, I take it away. I take it away.
All I thought about is because I was like, what do you call academic papers? Like, oh, dissertation, dissertation.
Oh my goodness.
I'm so happy you got it.
I think is that the first one that was actually gotten?
I think the first so.
Joke that anybody's ever gotten. So yeah. You see the academic prowess just flowing out of Geek. She's just very
wordplay,
very knowledgeable. So
yeah, hey. so this episode is as I was going to say geek, as Amber so aptly put it earlier, is going to be sort of an exploration on what she would, if she had a class on fantasy, on Tolkien, on this kind of thing, what she would talk about. So with that, why don't you take us away, Amber?
Yeah, and I just want to preface by saying that we're going to touch on religion today, but this is by no means like a moral judgment or code or telling anyone what to believe or thinking. That's your prerogative. I come at religious studies from a very academic standpoint. Like Tolkien, though, I was raised Catholic, so I do have that background. And kind of once I hit college, I started taking religious studies classes, deconstructing. Everyone thinks religious studies is like studying an actual practice of religion. It's not. It's like a literature class, a literature and culture class.
Nice.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. We will talk about religion, but No one's
Let
telling
everybody
you.
be a little more comfortable in this setting.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
It's going
Yeah,
No
this is
judgment-free zone
this
here.
is a very academic, a clinical look at things.
Let's do it. Let's make it
We're
happen.
not going to get into spirituality at all. Not really. And also allegory. I know every time a Tolkien fan hears the word allegory, they just clench up, right? They just clench because we all know that Professor Tolkien did not like allegory, and
Absolutely.
explicitly stated when he was working on Lord of the Rings and the works of Middle Earth that he was not setting out to write an allegory based on his own faith.
But
However, just because he didn't mean to doesn't mean that you can't find allegory in Middle Earth, and that's for a couple different reasons. And I would like to cite the death of the author and Tolkien's own theory of subcreation.
yeah, exactly. So we
I'm
get
just
into
gonna
these things. And,
lecture for a second.
Yeah, go right ahead. Go right ahead. Get into it.
So I want to specify with death of the author because I feel like that phrase gets used a lot in pop culture, especially we see it on TikTok all the time. People are citing death of the author, but not necessarily using it in the correct way. So death of the author does not mean separating art from the artist. That's a completely different concept. The death of the author is actually an academic paper written by Roland Barthes, which is a literary theorist. The concept is basically that it doesn't matter necessarily what an author intends to write when they write something. It is up to the reader. We get to interpret it how we see fit. So the author may intend one meaning, but the reader may interpret a different meaning. And that's okay. We are participating in the creation of the work in that way by interpreting it.
Yeah. I was literally going to say, I'll use a prime example. With that being said, now Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and he said no allegory, but constantly, there's two holy numbers in the Bible that are constantly used, 3 and 7, and 7 is seen innumerable times within the Lord of the Rings, and it's not just accidental. It's very much on purpose. You got the 7 stars. You got 7 kings. You got the 7 rivers. You got so many representations of the number 7, which is a very holy number. That one tends to think, were you not intending this as an allegory? But even if you weren't, I think subconsciously you put it in there because that would be a number that means a lot to somebody who is deep into religion. So whether you're doing it on purpose or not, things can manifest themselves in your writing. And then even if you didn't mean it for it to happen, just like Amber said, I'm taking it like that. I'm definitely taking it like that with all the representations of 7 that we see, which we can get into. I mean, we can literally have Callie just be like, "Hey, Callie, how many representations of 7 are in the?" And she can find it. She's a wizard. She can find it. But it's a lot, and it's really interesting. So it begs a question like, purposefully or non-purposefully, how serious should we take the allegory that is actually in the forefront? And then there's plenty of other examples there, but I'll let Geek, answer that or get into that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this also goes to say, I know a lot of folks have different interpretations of certain aspects of Lord of the Rings. They have different headcanons, whatever you want to call it. And I personally view headcanons as totally valid. I think as long as you're not, there's very few exceptions. Like there's been some recent pieces of media that are culturally based where people are headcanoning things that directly disrespect the culture. I'm like, that's maybe don't do that. But in terms of Tolkien, like if you want to do a queer reading of it, I think that's completely valid. Because of Roland Barthes and the death of the author, as long as you can, if you read it, you see it, and you can defend it and use pieces of the work to support your thesis, I think that's a valid interpretation. It doesn't mean go reading everything willy-nilly and saying like, oh, this means blue is green and red is purple,
Yes.
As long as you can support it though within the works, I think that's valid.
Absolutely.
And that's why we can read allegory into it, even though the professor did not want us to.
And it's so interesting, it's allegory, and it's not just. So I take somebody like C.S. Lewis, where the allegory is very straightforward, where
right.
Aslan is Jesus. Aslan is Jesus, and it's very Christian. But with Tolkien, it's a mixture. I find it's a mixture.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
we can find Norse mythology, we can find Christianity, we can find Greek mythology. Clearly, there's a hierarchy of the Greek mythos is plainly seen there, and then there's very much so the Christian Judea God is there as well, and it's so much of a mixture. And we see where he took things, and he was like, okay, I'm taking this from this, putting it in his writing. I don't mean for it to be this, but then yet and still, even the theme of there being an omnipotent God who creates everything, and he's not evil, but apart from him, and once was evil. So and it became Melkor or Morgoth, and he very much just like Satan wanted light. And it's like, how can you ask me not to take this like that? Like, how can you ask me seriously not to take this like that? It very very much like Lucifer. So I find it really interesting that is such a broad, a bright topic of don't take this as allegory, but we see it so much, and it's in the vastness of how many different religions it covers in Tolkien's case.
Right.
It's actually really it's really crazy. It's not crazy in a bad way, but it's just crazy. It's actually mind boggling. So I find it
Yeah, and
very
you
interesting.
bring up C.S. Lewis, and I kind of want to. So the second part of why I think we can read Allegory is Tolkien's own theory. He subscribed to the theory of subcreation, which just on a very surface level is the idea that if you are a religious person, if you believe in God, the closest that you could get to godliness is through creating art, creating something yourself. So in the act of creating, he's as close as he could get to godliness. So C.S. Lewis also bought into this, but C.S. Lewis, I believe, pushed it just like one step further. And famously, Tolkien helped C.S. Lewis convert to Christianity, but it was very miffed when C.S. Lewis did not become Catholic. He felt like he missed that final step into Catholicism. But so C.S. Lewis takes it one step further with the idea that if God is real, right? If a God exists and we consider God to be true, then because, writing is truth, God will exist in every world, including written worlds. And I think that's why with C.S. Lewis, we get such the heavy-handed allegory, the one-to-one Aslan Jesus sort of situation. Versus, like you mentioned, with Tolkien, it's a lot more subtle. I've had a lot of folks push back, like with Lord of the Rings, be like, well, is Aragorn the Jesus figure, or is Gandalf the Jesus figure? Because Gandalf more literally, we see him die and come back, versus Aragorn's like the return of the king. Like a little bit of both.
A little bit of both, mixture.
A little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I personally interpret the Lord of the Rings as being more evocative of the Book of Revelations, if you're familiar with the Bible. Like it's like the second coming story for anyone who is raised religiously. The first, like your Genesis story, is in the Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With the creation of the world, and you have a very literal kind of Satan figure in Morgoth.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very similar. Yeah, I find it interesting too. With something you just said, people are looking, or the person's looking to be closest to God through their writing or through their work, and then we can see examples, literally, like are imitating life within his work. So we'll take somebody like Feanor, who by all means has the skill of a god, but it very much isn't a god. And through his creation, he's like, it's like him being godly. Even the gods themselves are like, wow, how did he do this? And then somebody like Morgoth wanting that as well. He's always trying to create things. Even Aule, Sauron, all these beings that, they aren't Eru. Eru is the only true one, right? But they're trying to ascend to that place, whether it's for selfish reasons, or it's just they think that's part of their being, or whatever the case may have you. But they're trying to ascend what they're naturally given, and escalate to something higher and be something better. Depending upon who it is, it's different reasoning. But like very much Feanor feels like he is that guy. I'm that guy.
Right,
I'm
right.
the best. And he makes the Silmarils, and this is a problem with him, and this is why he becomes so narcissistic. So it kind of backfires in his case, and that could be also seen as you're not that guy. You're not. You are flawed, whereas I'm not. As that's something that Christians teach. I teach like you guys are going to sin. I'm perfect. You can never be God. It's kind of idol worship in a sense. You know what I'm saying? Like and that the same goes for all of the other beings that try this, but you see it time and time again, and they're all very narcissistic to a certain point, but they're
Right.
very skilled, and it's like they're the best of the best at what they do. Morgoth, given the most powers of all, a gift, a share of all the other Valar. He's the most powerful. He's the most mighty. Boom, very gifted. Sauron, literally, his name is the Admiral. You know what I'm saying? Like he is the greatest student of Aule. He is that guy, and so he sees himself in a perfect light, and he wants things to be perfect. And in Aule, even though Aule is good, he's not
Hmm.
somebody who wants to control, but he still wants to create
He's
and wants
still, yeah.
wants to be adored. He just isn't like evil in his doing it, but it's still Errol had to come down and tell him, "Hey, that's me. That's not your place." You know what I'm saying? So it's really interesting to see that representation of what you said within certain characters. So he didn't even, I don't even know if he intended that, but that goes to show that as well. Like things
Right.
can be considered in your art.
And I think it's just because there are certain like pillars of storytelling in Western media. I'm not going to pretend like I know a lot about cultures other than Western media, but there are certain pillars of storytelling that we frequently see repeated. So if you think about, Joseph Campbell has a book called, it's like Hero with a Thousand Faces, and he talks about the hero's journey. I do want to preface by saying that Joseph Campbell's work is not perfect. He kind of twisted things to fit his theory rather than just finding stuff that supports it. So he is not considered a legitimate academic source. However, because his hero's journey was the basis of George Lucas's Star Wars screenplay, that kind of popularized that storytelling in Hollywood. So that's why I still feel like his work is relevant, even if it's not considered, academically valid. But he has, there's certain, beats. There's like different beats where you have the call to adventure, the hero refuses the call, then something happens, they get a mentor, they begin their journey, these certain beats that happen in stories. And I think you can find them in the Bible to an extent. You find them in Lord of the Rings. So just kind of how different forms of storytelling just mirror each other. Because it's what we as an audience expect from stories in certain
Yeah.
genres. You see it a lot more in genre, fantasy, sci-fi, in like straight quote quote literature, whatever that means. I think you have a little bit more leeway, but there's almost an audience expectation that the hero in sci-fi or fantasy will face certain obstacles and certain story beats.
Yeah, they'll go through certain things. We get like just a taste of something. The heroes in Middle Earth are not perfect by any means or measure.
Right.
So we have great peoples that do great things, and then they themselves it's like a mixture of stories and tales. So Sodom and Gomorrah, where things start to go bad, and it's very much the people that are ruining it for themselves. You can see the Numenorians in that, and then you can flip that also and bring in the Great Flood, where it's time to wipe them out. It's time to wipe them out, and they're gonna have to. A couple are going to be saved, and we're going to have to start this thing over again. The Atlantean story of Numenor. It's really interesting. So we have the Atlantean
Yeah.
side of it, and then we have the biblical side of it, like
Right.
the great flood that was sent to wipe out those stories. They're both there. It's crazy how they're both represented there, and they fit so perfectly together. And no matter which side you're looking or what religion you come from, I think you can find a piece of your own history inside of it somewhere in Tolkien's works. Even like we were thinking about at the end, the Dagor Dagorath. It's literally Ragnarok. It's literally Ragnarok.
Yeah,
Ragnarok.
yeah.
So it's
And I
really
think with
interesting.
a lot of these things, like why, like the Noah and the Ark, the 40 days and nights, the flood, and Atlantis, kind of like why these things pop up across cultures is because, folks back then were just writing about things that were happening. Did the
Yeah.
entire earth flood? No, but it was like the known area to them. As far as
Yes.
they knew, everything flooded. So because these major events were happening, they got reinterpreted different ways.
Yeah, I always
Cultures.
love that, especially within the Old Testament. Like, it's how, whether you believe or not, like most things are nature,
Right.
are
Yeah.
nature-esque, and so you can see how things were interpreted and say, okay, I see how that was interpreted as that, but it probably was this, and which is cool. The known world and the world are two different things, which is completely fine. So we got to remember, in antiquity, back in the olden days, the known world was what was known to them. They don't know about.
Yep.
They didn't know about the Americans till it was a long time till they knew about the Americas. So the known world to them, the Mediterranean, what I'm saying, Asia, Africa, they didn't know anything really else. You know what I'm saying? The Middle East is these are hubs, and something devastating happens there, they thinking it's the whole world. And I think it's really cool how it can get translated. The stories get taken and they get put into things, whether they're taken as what I'm saying, like a warning story, a creation story, or just an explanation, just an explanation to get people to follow you in a sense, because that also was a thing. Hey, I'm the king because I know this. I know why this happened, and they said do this, and that's very much seen in the Lord of the Rings as well. Hey, I had this vision. Follow me. Do this. I know this. I'm better at this. So
Right.
they told me, this person told me, how you don't want to go against the gods, right? You better listen to me. Like type situations where they're seen, and allegory plays a part in all of it, purposefully or non-purposefully. So we could go
Yep.
on and on and on about it.
Yeah, so one of the ones I really want to talk about, I mentioned Morgoth earlier, and like Melkor, the fall of Melkor, I feel like it's the clearest allegory in Tolkien. So I know a lot of people will be like, oh, Sauron's like the Satan figure. I'm like, no, I see Sauron as the Antichrist. Again, if you've been raised in any sort of like Christianity, like in the end days, an Antichrist will come up, pose like as the savior and mislead people. So that's what I see Sauron as, and especially because he's Sauron the deceiver, right?
Yeah.
But Morgoth, Melkor is such a perfect, almost perfect allegory of the fall of Lucifer. I do want to preface this by saying, I challenge folks, you can find mentions of a serpent, of Satan, of Lucifer in the Bible, but when you think about the fall of Lucifer, that story, can you cite where in the Bible it is? You can't, can you?
Yeah.
Because the actual, like what we're taught, like what you're taught in Sunday school, or what we know culturally as like the fall of Lucifer, that story written down is not written down in the Bible. It comes from an extra biblical text, the Junius manuscript. It's Junius 11 from the Oxford Bodleian Library, which was a medieval text basically detailing the fall of Lucifer. And folks have argued with me all the time saying, oh, but it mentions Lucifer right here. And there's kind of some argument amongst biblical scholars as to the actual translation of the word. But I'm telling you, if you look in any Bible, you cannot find where it's written down that Lucifer wanted to be like God and disobeyed him, and because of that, like the story written beat for beat is not written beat for beat in the Bible. It's in the Junius manuscript. But it's kind of anyone who's been raised in any sort of like Christian household, we all know that story, right? We were taught it growing up in Sunday school or whatever. Maybe even if you didn't grow up in a particularly religious household, it's still like a major part of the cultural consciousness.
Yeah.
And that story matches perfectly with Melkor's fall and turning into Morga. Like, he is known as the most beautiful. He is, you know, what the greatest, the most powerful, and like Lucifer, you know, aspires to be just as great as Eru. And for that ends up, you know, rebelling and being cast out. Like, it's such a perfect allegory that I struggle to believe that Tolkien was not aware of what he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The shift
Even the
of blame.
renaming from Melkor to Morgoth, from
Yeah.
Lucifer to Satan.
The shift of blame is really something important to me. It's to shift the blame from the omnipotent being to another being, where it's like, our God could never do that. Our God could never be evil. It can't be. We can't blame him for evil. Like, but they are the most powerful. They are in charge of everything. So could you or could you not? And it goes deep into what you were saying about, you know, Lucifer being there. Are the Bible very much didn't have certain parts in it, and then those things were added into it. And not, whether you want to believe it or not, it's not my. This is not me telling you anything's wrong or anything. It's just we're going with academic strictly. So there, what at first there was just God, and then okay, so now your friend dies, or something blows up, or you know, kids get murdered or something, and you're like, that's God. God's in charge of everything. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. So now a figurehead appears that can take that blame. That is the evil one that was cast down. Now we put it all on that person or that being, and very much Melkor is the one who wears that burden and wears that crown. And now he is the scapegoat, not the scapegoat because he is evil, but we're like, okay, it's not Eru. Even though we're still being told Eru was in charge of everything. He even tells Melkor, all you do is from me. All you do is from me. Well, we're still mad at Melkor. You know what I'm saying? And people ask all the time, but I don't know if they think about that. They say, well, why didn't Eru just stop Melkor then? I think that question answers itself.
That's like one of the great philosophical debates in any religion, right? Like, oh, if you believe in a God that is omnipotent, then why don't they stop bad things from happening? I'm like, well, that's just not how it works.
That's not how it works. There's a lesson that needs to be taught, all of those things. And
Yeah.
you know, I tell people all the time, you can't argue faith. You can't argue with somebody's faith. It's just, so trying to do it is, what is the point? You know, there really is the person's going to say there's a very much there's a masses thing, and then there's being lonely. You don't want to be lonely when the masses are like, I believe in this. And we've seen in history what happens to the lone person. You know, very much they're known as a heretic and things and this, that, and the third. And it's a very lonely world. Jesus was very much in that number as well. So you know, religion spreads that way. It spread with the masses, and then it takes a lot for it to shift from one other thing. So somebody can just come up with something, and if they have enough power and influence to spread it, hey, this is this. And if you don't believe this, you know, I'm in a position to where I say this, and now you kind of have to believe it, else you're going against God. So if the Pope were to decree something, who are you to say that you're not talking to God? I'm the Pope. I'm talking to God. You know, the Crusades started with it
One of the great problems of religion.
Things like that. Constantine the Great.
Yeah, it's been weaponized for so long.
You know, Constantine spread Christianity after it was outlawed because he saw the politicalness of, hey, are we going to do paganism or Christianity? These are the two factions that are rising. Which politically makes more sense? And then we get to he picks one and he says, I had it. Prior to Constantine, it was illegal to be a Christian. And then he says, hey, Jesus came and talked to me, and this is this. And now he's the head of the Roman Empire. So now it spreads, and now it's okay to be Christian. And everybody wants to be Christian, which is that's completely fine and everything. Just explaining, how things take place. And then these things also take place within the world of Tolkien. And it's remarkable how literally no allegory, but Sauron's like, but wait, you don't know about this guy. And Sauron, they know Sauron is a higher than them. So whereas they were completely like against the gods in Numenor, Sauron's like, hey, but I can teach you this. I know this. And they're like, damn, he has given us this. He has told us this. He did rule the world. He is a Maya or something. He's better than us, stronger than us. We're going to listen to him. And we're going to listen to him so much that we're going to go against the other gods and risk our whole civilization for it. You know what I'm saying? So those dark things are mirrored within Tolkien's universe, and the allegory is there. Even those dark things are mirrored, and that's why I brought them up. Whether you believe them or not is irrelevant. They're mirrored within Tolkien's world.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the reason why we see so many similar themes across religions, across all stories, is because there's something so fundamentally human about it, right? The curiosity about life, death, rebirth. Is there an afterlife? What might that look like? It's part of our human nature, I think, to wonder about these things and to write about them in some way or another.
Yeah.
Sorry if you hear Chili barking in the background. He's highly offended that his mother is recording a podcast instead of paying attention to him.
But that's all right though. So what is your favorite? I know you mentioned the Melkor allegory there. What is your favorite one? Is that your favorite? Period?
That's one of my favorites, but just the entire concept. So I took a class in college on depictions of Satan in art and literature. So that's why I know like so much specifically about the Melkor story, because I made the argument for not my final paper, but my final presentation, that actually Morgoth is the Satan figure in Tolkien's world, not Sauron, as everyone tends to think, because most folks are only familiar with, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. Yes. But you have a whole entire creation story right here. So that's one of my favorite ones to talk about. And I really think you can interpret the Lord of the Rings as like a book of Revelations, allegory, parable, whatever you want to call it. I like to say that the Witch King is like, because there's a figure in the book of Revelations known as the Whore of Babylon, who rides like has a monster that she rides in on. So I'm like, the Witch King.
As the Whore of Babylon.
Coming in on that fell beast.
Wow.
Coming in on that fell beast. Yeah.
You disrespected my boy, the Witch King, like that, calling him a whore.
Well,
Yeah.
No regrets. I don't apologize.
That's awesome. No, of course not. Of course not. That's awesome.
And I think you can draw so many parallels. But again, it's also up to like reader interpretation, right? We are, as readers, helping create meaning within this work.
Yeah, so when I see things, I'm equating them to these things. So you listen to this podcast, you see me equating this to that, but that might not be everybody's experience. So you might equate it to something completely different, and we want to hear the feedback from that. So if you are watching the podcast, leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you agree, you disagree. We are open to all ends of the conversation. Also, if it's something that you are liking within this conversation and you want to, tell your side, hey, we don't only take famous people like Geek. We don't only take famous people like, we can have all kinds of.
I don't know if I'd say famous.
No,
I don't know about all that.
we would love to have anyone on, and we could talk about this, get into this philosophical, very deep conversation about this. This is something that is extremely important and near and dear to people's heart. Nothing moves the world like religion. Like much of the world's events are driven by religion, or
for better, for worse, mostly for
better
worse,
or for worse. You know what I'm saying? A lot of it's for worse, but
a lot of it's for worse.
Let's be real. Is good. One thing I admire about religion, and then we can also see this in the Lord of the Rings as well. You can say what you want about people misusing it, but the faith and it's something beautiful about somebody who really believes and then they want to do right by the laws or anecdotes that are given within their religion. It's beautiful to see that. It's beautiful for them to. This is something I was raised. I was raised as a Baptist, so we would always sing hymns and everything. And when somebody's singing about something they truly believe in, I think it's really beautiful. We see that a lot in Tolkien's world. Them worshiping the elves and Varda in for example, and then them singing the reverence for Varda. It's very much like Christians singing about their reverence for Jesus and or any other religion, and they're singing about it. So I think that is really cool. And then the structure that it's supposed to provide, and the messages and the anecdotes of good that as long as those people are following those guidelines that are set, very very much how it's given. If you take, for example, Aesop's tales, they're meant to be stories that guide you to say, hey, don't do this or do this, and these are just guidelines or that. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, and you can see those stories and those anecdotes within Tolkien's writing and within all religions, it's very good when you see that. It gives people something to believe and to aspire to be better people. And then of course, it could get misused and misconstrued.
Usually with a political agenda.
There's always an agenda with it and stuff. It's a very tricky topic. I'm sure somebody will watch this and be like, "What is he saying? Sacrilegious?" Like, whatever. I don't really
honestly. I feel like if I am not someone who would have been accused of being a heretic or sacrilegious in the Middle Ages, then I'm not living life right.
So, but we got to have these conversations and talk about these things, and it's really interesting. It's really deep. It's really profound.
Yeah.
So, man,
like I said, it's such a human thing. Whatever you believe or don't believe is totally valid, and I think if you find comfort in religion, that's great. As long as if it inspires you to be a better person, as long as you're not hurting other people, I love that for you.
Love it for you. I love it for you. And that is basically the moral of anything. Like, if you like it, I love it. You know what I'm saying? But the respect should be there. You know what I'm saying? There's room for all things in the world for the most part, as long as they're not like harmful to anybody else. There's room for it, and you know what I'm saying, and just be respectful, and it shouldn't. If you look at it, the similarities between all of the things, you know what I'm saying. If you even look at the similarities between the races in Middle Earth, whether they get along or not, wow, we the elves and the dwarves found solace and comfort in each other in Second Age of Middle Earth because they said, hey, we actually worship and believe in the same God, Smith God, Smith Valar. We both really love creating and making things. This was made from us and was put into us. What are we fighting for? Let's and that's when they got along the best. So you could say that Muslims and Christians, same thing. Like you kind of really believe in the same thing. You just for whatever reason there's a disconnect or a misunderstanding or
different prophets.
But you guys really for
same
the most
core
part,
beliefs.
Exactly same thing. The main core beliefs are the same. So it's really interesting, to see it, and then obviously to see the parallels. The parallels is all about parallels.
And kind of bring it back to Tolkien, I think the concept of subcreation is such a beautiful idea that the closest we can, as humans, can get to godliness or divinity is through creating, through art. Like that's amazing. I love it. I fully believe it.
And the Noldor create.
And the Noldor create.
The Noldor create. The stories are just creation. And we got the Silmarils, the Nauglamir, the great swords are always brought up. They're always shined upon within the stories. This is what they made. Look at this everlasting city that was so great. Like this was what they made. And the Noldor made these runes that are now being used by X, Y, and Z. Look at this. The Palantir, they're still doing what they're supposed to do. And it's just Everything is creation of some sort.
Yep, but there's still the warning there, right? Especially with Feanor. And we all know I'm not a fan of Feanor. Personally, I feel like they should have just thrown him off a cliff and been done with him
Get him
and did
out of
all
here.
their problems before it started. But yeah, there's still the warning story, right? Feanor loved to create, but it got to him, it got in his head.
Got in his head.
So there's always that warning underlying in Tolkien, and again in a lot of religious texts, a lot of writing in general, of don't get too prideful.
Don't get too prideful. Pride.
Watch that hubris. Yeah.
Pride will be your fall, and the way he felt.
And in the case of Feanor, he brought everyone down with him.
Brought everybody down with them. Yep. And then you see the examples of people who like learn from it, learn from the mistake. Hey, you know what? Galadriel. You know what? I was very prideful. I wanted this. It didn't turn out well. I have a chance to make a decision again, make a choice again. I'm going to resist this, and we're going to be better for it. I'm going to let it go, let it be handled by its own self. You know, I'm not going to try to mess with will or fate. That is for Arrow to do. I'm going to step back. I'm going to help it along like I was predestined to do, and do what they do, but I'm not going to try to control it and try to be and try to take, and then it's going to corrupt me. So she learned her lesson to where that's what you should be looking at and learning from. So it's very cool as well.
Yep. Again, the whole dichotomy of pride, humility, so present throughout the Bible, so present throughout Tolkien.
It's really awesome.
Yeah. So again, how was he intending to write allegory? Absolutely not. Did he? Yeah.
Yeah. Had an hour-long conversation of the allegory that he just accidentally did. So it's steeped in allegory, even though it's not supposed to be. So
well,
next
even
time
C.S. Lewis claims he wasn't like writing a direct allegory. I was like, are you sure about that, sir?
Right. C.S. Lewis.
I don't know about all that.
Yeah, he was out of control. He's definitely on it. Aslan. I love Aslan though. I love
C.S. Lewis. Like,
I love
have you read the full series?
Yeah, I love those books, and I even love the movie adaptations. A lot of people are like, those aren't good. They're actually really close. Those are really closely adapted to the books.
Right.
Yeah.
Really well. I love them. Back in the day, I used to love the animated one too. I used to watch that shit all the time.
It's so interesting that you bring up adaptation, because you think about how closely the Narnia books were adapted into the films, and yet they're not as beloved versus as like the Lord of the Rings adaptations, which were
way more
different from the books.
Adapted comparatively, right?
But are still held up as like a paragon. And this is kind of like, this is a conversation for another podcast. I can get into this for an hour. The like whole problem with adaptation and folks' expectations with adaptation. Because really the only point of adaptation is to stay true to the core story. And then from that, it's two different art forms, they're gonna be different.
Yeah.
And when they are too directly one for one, you get things like Narnia, which people didn't always like.
It's crazy because I'm somebody who finds myself on both sides of that fence, where I'm somebody who's like, hey man, I would like to see this just how it was written and everything like that. But then I also from experience hate and understanding things can't be that way, that hey, I know it should be like this or whatever, we would like it to be like that, but I understand why they had to change that, or why they went this route, or this is a different medium. And this is so important, the relationships you build within the communities that are allotted to us by the internet, because somebody like you can teach somebody like me who doesn't know how to do a screenplay or something like that, whereas you went to school for it, you're very much in the forefront of that knowledge, and you could be like, hey, listen, from a screenwriter's perspective or a writer's perspective, this is why that doesn't make sense. And I could be like, let's see what this is. As opposed to somebody who just Steve just yelling at me and we're not listening to each other. I take your academic prowess and I'm like, you know what? I think they know what they're talking about. They're speaking very intelligently about it, and they have the degrees to back it up. So I can take that more seriously, as opposed to just, John shouting at me on TikTok.
User 65732. Yeah.
User
it's
1,
always
2,
user 367521 with no profile picture and no posts.
It's always that.
circle back to another point, you were asking me like what my favorite examples of allegory are in Lord of the Rings. Another one that I like to bring up, especially because folks like to say, oh, is Gandalf the Jesus figure or Aragorn? And I think it's both, but I think it's so clever that it's both because in Christianity, there's the concept of, Christ Jesus as being both human and divine. So you get literally two different manifestations of him, Lord of the Rings. You get the human manifestation and then the divine.
Yeah. Yep. You got the divine one, Gandalf, and the more human
Yep.
one is Aragorn. You know what I'm saying? Faced with impossible decisions, both impossible
Yep.
decisions, and not knowing, hey, should I reveal myself? Is it going to be for the detriment of my people? But it needs to get done. You could just pick it apart all day.
Yep, and that's why you get the more literal death and rebirth with Gandalf, the divine side, versus Aragorn, the human side, coming back to like reclaim the throne.
Yeah.
I'm telling, it's all in there. If you see it, it's all in there.
So Callie.
Yeah.
Oh, I was about to say, well, I know you had some questions for us.
I do have a question, a burning question. Just like to help our listeners and myself as well out, like to learn more about this topic and Tolkien's thoughts on it. Like what works, or like do you have reading that you could recommend? Like I know I took a lot for like this podcast, I looked at of fairy stories. Or on fairy stories, and the letters by Tolkien also have a lot of this sort of stuff in them.
Yeah, so on fairy stories is going to be one of the best reads. You can actually Google, if you Google Tolkien subcreation, it'll pull up a lot of academic papers on it. And that's one of the first things I do. And then I'll go to the works cited and start being like, boom, boom, read this paper. Tolkien also has a poem called Mythopia or myth making, which kind of mentions his like subcreation in that. Here, I'll just quote part of it. He refers to the human author as the little maker.
Oh.
your world immutable, wherein no part the little maker has with maker's art.
Oh, I like that. I like that very much.
Yes. So again, seeing us as the closest we can get to divinity is through creation. We are the little maker. We are making a smaller reflection of God's creation within the larger creation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. From On Fairy Stories, I saw at some point somewhere he wrote a new, like in such fantasy, a new form is made, where fairy begins and man becomes the sub-creator. And I really like that imagery of like just a new form takes shape once you start writing.
Yeah. And at the end, the creation of the world was in the beginning, in Tolkien's world, was made by the Valar and the Maya, and then at the end it's going to be made by the elves and by men, and they're going to create it, and it's going to be better for it. So I think that's another cool gem.
Just seeing that belief reflected back at us in Middle Earth. Yep.
Yes.
And all of this kind of boils down to, what is art? What do we as humans strive to do when we are creating art? It's usually to reflect upon or reveal some truth about the human condition, right? So all art is truth at the end of the day. Even when we're, but you're making stuff up, you're telling lies. No, because if you look at the deeper meaning in any piece of literature or art, there is going to be that kernel of truth, that little lesson that reflects upon life.
Yeah. So
wow.
I mean,
we're gonna end it right
know.
there. That's perfect.
I don't really know how we could top that. But I really am really thankful to have you come and share all your vast knowledge with us, and for us to have that conversation. It's not always easy to talk about religion, but it was very seamless to do it with you. And we did it in an academic setting, and it was awesome. And thank you so much. We appreciate
Of course,
you.
loved being here.
Yeah, this was an
Now,
awesome episode.
Yeah, if anyone,
before,
if you ever want to talk about philosophy, religion, someone just hit me up on TikTok. I'd love to talk about this stuff.
yeah, she's on top of it. But before we boot her out of here, no, I'm
No.
just kidding. Before we get out of here, I always have questions I like to ask our guests. So you
Okay.
answer them. All right. So the questions I always ask are: you can pick anybody in any from any age or any time period or any
Oh, Lord.
race. So I ask three questions. I say, who would you marry in the Lord of the Rings and the entire Legendarium? Who would you marry? Who would you have protect you? And who would you fight?
I would marry Faramir
Okay.
because books Faramir is peak. He is elite. He is himbo. If we're talking movies, it would be Samwise, but in books, Faramir.
Faramir is that guy in the book.
He's just like,
Yeah.
he's just so noble and good. Who would I have protect me? I feel like you have to say like Aragorn or Gandalf. I think I would trust Aragorn. I trust Aragorn with my life.
Okay.
And then who would I fight?
Surrounded by the hot dudes I see.
Have taste. Or I could have said Eowyn. Well, we're going with skill level.
Okay.
Who would I fight? Who do I want to fight in Tolkien? That's a great question. I want to fight Fëanor, but that would probably be a losing fight for me. I'd love to fight Fëanor.
One thing you can do is you can have the person that's protecting you fight the person that you want to fight for you.
There you go. We're fighting Fëanor.
All right. I don't think that's
Fixing all of history's ills in one go.
Fëanor's gotta go. Fëanor's gotta go.
Fëanor gotta go.
Callie, do you have any words for us?
I do. So, as always, we finish the podcast with a little self-care tip or series of tips. I'm going to take us out of the topic for today and give you some ideas on how to prioritize self-care during the holidays, because the season is coming. Tis the season.
Happy holidays, by the way, guys.
Yeah. Right back at you. And to our listeners as well. All right. So how to prioritize self-care during the holidays. 1, know and respect your limits. 2, set reasonable expectations. 3, avoid known triggers. 4, find ways to give back. 5, decorate and dress for comfort. And number 6, be extra giving to yourself.
Absolutely. Very important. Self-love.
Yes.
Self-love. So, guys, with that is the end of this episode of Voices of Arda. Geek, one more time, where can we find you?
You can find me on TikTok and Instagram as CritiqueGeek. All one word.
You will remember that. Spread the word. CritiqueGeek is in the building. Thank you so much. Thanks you.
For having me.
Shout out to your what's your dog's name?
Hey,
Chili.
Shout out to Chili.
The always guest.
The special guest appearance.
Yeah.
And as always, Callie, love you. Appreciate you. We are out. Thank you so much, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone.